It's incredible. Just being, even just calling yourself a Jew, given everything that we've been through, is an incredible accomplishment. And I'm sure it just any mitzvah done by a Jew today reduces God to tears. I'm sure it does. All the more so people who aren't raised with it, and it's not, let's say, as meaningful to them.
Welcome back to JTV Podcasts. Is that what we're calling it, by the way? Is it simple as that? Are you happy with that? This is me running it by you.
You're the boss.
This is the meeting right now. So this week, I thought we'd talk about something that's very close to home to both of us, which is just a Jewish journey. We've spoken about this in the past. We have had similar-ish journeys, similar kind of key points, going from being aware and around the Orthodox Jewish world in London, and then becoming more religious in our late teen, early 20 years. And I want to speak about sort of that kind of journey, because I have a lot of chats with some people from all different strokes in lives they've gone up the rings of taking up more mitzvot, more laws, or they've got more involved in their Judaism, or they've added more meaning to the things they were always doing. And there are a lot of common themes and common pitfalls as well that come up with it. So I thought we could chat about that, and I've got a few key points I wanted to bring up, but just the general flow of similar paths. So maybe I'll go up with you. What for you, thinking back on it, and when would you say you started getting really into your Judaism?
Well, I think this should be definitely a conversation which we are equally engaged in, because I want to know your story as well and hear about your experiences, because everyone's experience is different, and you can learn insights about the human psyche and Judaism and what's appealing, what's not, through different people's stories. So I definitely would like to explore that with you. For me, it was like there's lots of key milestones along the way. I think I grew up, I feel like, with a strong British culture, and really, I mean, just in some ways felt more naturally, instinctively British than I did Jewish in some respects. But I remember when I was about 3, 4, 5, becoming more aware of my Jewish identity, and also the fact that not everyone else in Britain is Jewish, which was a bit of a chiddush, a bit of enlightening reality for me.
Were you at a Jewish primary school?
I went to a Jewish kindergarten.
Okay.
But then I went to a cheder on Sundays. But after that, went to a non-Jewish school, age from like reception onwards. So that's like what is
the end of your school till age 18, yeah.
Yeah. But I remember I would actually, when I realised not everyone's Jewish, I would go up to people and say, "Excuse me, are you kosher or Christian?" And my mum never stopped me. I asked her years later, like, "Why did you never stop me from doing that?" And she was just like, "Because it was good. You were getting to, understanding you're Jewish. You were getting, comfortable with your identity." So, and she always hammered into us from a very, very young age, when you get married, you have to marry someone who is Jewish. And even though sometimes when she asked me that, I would say, pretty, but I did, apparently. I actually did. But the good news is you can have both. But I became sort of more aware, and I recognized the importance of that. And then I would say the next sort of big milestone for me was probably my bar mitzvah teacher, who was brilliant. And I think it's a bit mental that so much of the time is spent with bar and bar mitzvah students, well, certainly bar mitzvah students, learning how to lane from the Torah a huge chunk of their parsha in a language they don't really understand, that they're going to forget a few weeks afterwards. I mean, what are we doing? What are we doing? Like, we could be teaching kids about the fundamentals of Jewish beliefs and practice and culture and all those things, but and it's good. Some people do it hand in hand. That's great, but I really think the emphasis should be on the latter, not the former. Anyway, luckily I did have that with this teacher, a man called Tzvi Khan, and I continued learning with him for many years after that. I voluntarily, I said, can I keep learning with him once a week? And it was just honestly the most meaningful part of my week.
You pushed for that age, what, 12, 13?
Yeah,
You asked
I asked my parents can I continue learning with him every week. Yeah, and so that was, I loved it. I honestly felt the most connected on it. You know when you're feeling more in tune with your soul and just getting in touch with that. I really felt a spiritual nourishment, and it was very basic things, just learning about the weekly Torah reading and getting deeper insights in that, talking about stories in Jewish history, and just really connecting to Judaism. And then, I don't know how far you want me to go. But if you're
going to stop at this point in life to compare with myself, I went to a Jewish primary school. I say that my family are quite traditional, modern Orthodox, United Synagogue in this country, in England. And so I went to a Jewish primary
school. By the way,
school.
so am I, just to be clear. So mine are like
family's very, very similar. Yeah. So I went to a Jewish primary school, which meant I had daily Jewish education. It's mad how many hours I must have had and how little I've really got out of it. But I was used to it, and I didn't know many non-Jews. But it's more when I left primary school and entered secondary school age 11, I went to a non-Jewish secondary school. That's when I really got to know non-Jews as friends. I know them around the sort of, the receptionist at Dad's work, but I hadn't really become peers. And also I had many guys who said to me, I've never met a Jew before. And I had a whole bunch of questions. And the first time I felt like I actually had to... it was more unique and more individual to me. It became my thing. Also, maybe I was more naive about this in my younger school years. I always assumed that everyone in my year had a very similar Jewish background, a very similar house at home. To the point where apparently I was once on a Shabbat afternoon and I was with a friend, and someone in my class drove by in a car. She waved out of her mum's car window, and I was in denial that it was her, because I couldn't have been. She's in our class. I didn't believe that anyone existed sort of really outside of my own little bubble, my own little world. So that's when I became really aware and opened my eyes a bit more that there was less religious Jews, more religious Jews, and non-Jews, and that we all just are human beings. So yeah, when I started year 7, when I started secondary school, my father pushed that I would have Jewish lessons outside of school twice a week, actually. And the aim of going from my entire high school years, age 11 to 18, but the hope was that if I wanted to, he wasn't pushing for it, but if I wanted to do a gap year, go to Israel and learn after I finishing high school before university, I would be equipped enough to make that choice. I wouldn't feel completely out of my depth. And there are funny stories of it where at the start I really didn't care for it. It was like an extra 2-4 hours a week for an 11-year-old who already had a busy school schedule. That seemed to get in the way. There was once a time where I hid in the downstairs cupboard in my house to get out of a Sunday morning lesson. And I remember hiding there for a good 20 minutes, and I realised that my mum was actually getting to the point of panic, where it goes oh, where's Sam? To did he leave the house? He's 11. Does he have his phone on? My phone? His phone's not picking up his phone. And I wrote a letter saying I wanted to quit. This letter was then read out to the said teacher at my bar mitzvah, which is a little bit awkward. And then at the start, I didn't have that. I was less grateful for it. I had these lessons up until I was 18. And the latter years, when I was at 16, 17, 18, I started to appreciate them more. And I appreciate them a ton more after the fact. But bizarrely, it was just sort of a thing I felt more forced into, the lessons. And so at a stage where I was developing my own individual, I am a Jew, different to other people around me, and that means that it should be meaningful to me. At the same time, not so appreciative of the kind of unique access I had. I also had bar mitzvah lessons where I learnt the laning, how to read the notes of the Torah about vows. My dad taught me. The last time I probably learnt proper Jewish stuff with my father, and it was very, very meaningful. And we only stuck in those lessons to the reading, but I was fortunate to have an external couple of teachers who helped me with just general Jewish ideas. In fact, nowadays there's a guy who's coming to his bar mitzvah who I learn with once a week, and he has 2 teachers. He's also in a non-Jewish school. One teacher goes through the laning, but his father pressed to find someone who could do just the general Jewish sort of outlook and give him some sort of awareness. Right now we're going through the Shabbat morning Siddur, the service, just so when he shows up on Shabbat morning, he's familiar with the tunes. If he comes what time of day, roughly what they're up to, different keywords, choreography is what I call it. And it's something so he feels more equipped. Also, we're trying to hopefully fit in deeper, more founding key fundamental Jewish ideas within that. So it's similar but sort of different, slightly different environments we place ourselves in. But I think, like you, I'm curious about this as well. must have been maybe 14, 15, that sort of like slightly more mature, slightly more intellectual teenage point.
Yeah, so what happened when I was 16, a very key moment in my journey was that I read a book called Beyond a Reasonable Doubt. And it basically tries to make the argument for an intellectual argument for God's existence.
Is it a Jewish book?
Yeah. It's
by
by a rabbi called Shmuel Waldman, I think. Rabbi Shmuel, I think that's his name. If you look up Beyond a Reasonable Doubt, you'll find it. But there was a specific chapter which completely got me hooked, called The Seven Wonders of Jewish History. And it's based on a class. I think Aish certainly adapted it, but it basically goes through 7 things that have happened in Jewish history and how the Torah clearly foretold these things. And given the fact that we know the Torah hasn't changed, as in we have evidence of it existing 2,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, so I know it's 3,334 years since we were given it, but I'm saying there's evidence of, because what people might say is, but they changed it to fit in with the things that happened.
Your friends Dead Sea Scrolls and
yeah, exactly, in the Septuagint, the Greek translation. But the point is that we have evidence that it's existed for thousands of years, and it says certain things are going to happen which go against all the laws of history, all the laws of the way other nations of history is manifest, and it just was so strikingly obvious to me that this argument is very strong, because it basically goes through these 7 things. And the 7 things are the fact that the Jewish people have been few in number, which the Torah prophesies, they, compared to other nations, and would also be scattered around the world throughout most of their history. I mean, is there any other nation that isn't bound by a common land, language, and culture? We have been bound by that, except we haven't been in that land, or haven't always used that common language, and haven't shared that common culture. But and also intensely persecuted. There's a whole language of words used to describe the kind of persecution the Jewish people experienced. Blood libels, ghettos, Holocaust, pogrom, and then it says that the Jewish people will survive, and we've survived despite those things that would normally doom a people. And while all these other nations and empires have risen and gone, and also, the Torah was convinced that the families of the earth would bless themselves through Abraham, that Abraham's name would be made great, despite the fact that at the time, the majority of the world was pagan, polytheistic, convinced that Judaism and Jewish values would be a light unto the nations, and the majority of the world now believe in the God of Abraham. And then also it talks about this relationship between the Jewish people and the land of Israel, that when the Jewish people are there, it will blossom, and when they leave, despite other nations and empires conquering the land, it will be desolate. And also prophesizing the 7th one was the Jewish people's return. And to me, this was just like, I'm being more, I believe, if you have an objective analysis of Jewish history and how the Torah foretells certain things, you're being, I believe, willfully blind or subjective. If you sort of say, well, there's no divine hand at work here, in my view. And so I remember, I just looked at this, I was like, whoa, this is crazy. And, it sort of concretized certain things that I was feeling intuitively about my Jewish identity and Judaism. But one of the curious things about the human psyche is that just because you know something you conclude that something is true, that as the founder of the Mussar movement said, what was his name?
Rabbi Yisrael Salanta.
Rabbi Yisrael Salanta. He said that the greatest distance in the earth is between the head and the heart. And that was certainly the case because, yes, I was more inspired, yes, I was more interested, but, if you're convinced there's a God, well, you're going to start acting as if there's a God, right? But nothing too dramatic changed in the way I behaved or I acted.
But did you feel at that point it became very sort of relevant to you in the 21st century? Because I knew a lot of these sort of big Jewish ideas before that when I learned in school, but they felt very distant, very hundreds of years ago, thousands of years ago.
Absolutely, I felt
and then it became sort of this also applies to me now.
Yes, absolutely. I felt like, wow, this is real. This is true. This is, and there's still more to be done. But for some reason it didn't, my behavior didn't change too much, but it just solidified my Jewish convictions. But the real thing that really got me going was going to Poland. As is the case with a lot of people. But just when I went to Poland, my grandfather actually was literally escaped weeks before the Nazis invaded, and got to his town. In fact, his apartment was taken over by the Gestapo, and they used it as their headquarters in his area. And I did a video about this, where I just remember there were a few key moments for me, but I just sort of feeling I describe in this video how we walked into this tunnel, this memorial tunnel, and at on the walls of each side there were lists that the Nazis had with loads and loads of names, of Jewish names, and there were red lines crossed through all of them because the red lines meant that they'd been put on the trains and off to their deaths. And I was at the back of this line, the whole Jewish group were walking through, and they get to the end and they sort of all standing there holding hands, singing, and I just remember just looking back at all those red lines crossed off and looking forward and seeing a living, breathing Jewish people, and I was like, this is just... It just put into poetry what I'd realised about Jewish history a year or two prior. It put into reality, and it was just one of the most awesome moments of my life. I mean, yeah, it was just absolutely incredible, deeply spiritual moment, and I really welled up, and I just felt very close to God at that moment. I felt just the reality of it all just really kind of fell like a ton of bricks on top of me in a very good way, and that's when after that I decided I want to go and study in Israel for a year.
You were like, what, 16?
This was when I was 17, going on 18 at this point now.
So year 13.
I was in year 13, yeah.
So I did
Last
it.
year of
It was a J-Roots trip.
Yes.
So I did that identical trip. I did it I was the year below you in school. But I remember from that trip, a lot of people felt incredibly inspired. I went with a bunch of people from non-Jewish schools, and I was probably one of the more religious people on that trip. Still in the past that even though I went to a non-Jewish school, I went to what I call the frummest, most religious of the non-Jewish schools. With a high percentage of sort of yarmulke, kippah wearers. But I remember a lot of guys felt very inspired, and people would say, I'm going to now wear tefillin, I'm going to go to shul every week, I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And they had this raging inspiration. I don't know how people kept it more than the week afterwards, though. I'm thinking, were there any stages for you where you felt this gear shift in your personal life, and then you translated that into actual actions? Or I'm now going to go to synagogue every week, I'm going to ask my rabbi these questions. Is there anything that... Or was it purely just internal?
Well, don't forget, this goes back to that cognitive dissonance thing again, where connecting the head and the heart. Don't forget that there's only 3 days after we saw the sea splits that we've started complaining to God about, to Moshe about, will there be water to drink? Can we trust God? And by the way, they hadn't had any water for 3 days, so give them, I think, so give them some credit. But the point is, it is hard. I mean, at the same time, I think these things leave, even if people don't, I was once asked about how can you measure the effect JTV videos have had on people, and I say, well, I can't always measure it, but that doesn't mean it's not having an impact. And sometimes people, they can be touched very deeply by these trips, and it might not have changed anything immediately or externally in how they behave or act, but it sort of, it plants certain seeds for future, and also just for a certain consciousness and awareness that may not be manifest in any specific action or external perception, but it can be very much there. Someone may decide not to marry out just from one of these things. You might never know that, but they just... So for me, the big sort of external change for me was I decided to start wearing kippah, which I think is quite a big deal. If you're not wearing kippah and you start wearing one, it's a real statement. It means that you are taking on a responsibility to be an ambassador for the Jewish people and for God. I'm not saying I always get that right. I don't, but that's the aim behind it. And it means you're also putting certain things. It's you're making a certain statement about who you are and what you value, and you're less likely to get involved in, the other things that perhaps late teens might be doing. It's a statement, and it takes real pride and conviction to do that. And I remember someone said to me when I went back to school and started wearing one, they said, "Oh, I bet that'll be off within a week." And of course, I said, "Challenge accepted."
So they taught any teenage guy to not do something.
10 years later, it was the best thing that someone could have said to me, to be honest, because I like to be contrarian. So that's what happened. I decided I wanted to go to yeshiva to study in Israel, even though I had no idea what yeshiva really meant. I really didn't know what it meant. I mean, I'd never learned Talmud before. I'd never really learned that much other than just like the weekly Torah reading, gaining nice insights into it. But I did go, and I'm glad that I did.
Yeah. I'm thinking about it, actually. I remember we had some rabbis on the trip. And they said to us, if any of the boys, they want to wake up a few minutes early and daven and pray with the rabbis and wear their tefillin, that meet at this time in the hotel. And we had it in my school. We had a sort of a minyan. We'd daven and we'd pray in the morning a few times in the week, and occasionally I'd bring them in more to get the croissant and breakfast afterwards. But I would never be that independent in it. I would very rarely, if ever, go to synagogue in the week, even on holidays, by myself. I've been on summer camps where the level of religiousness in the summer camp was that everyone would pray 3 times a day, so everyone had to show up and they were dragged in. But no one really wanted to be there, especially the kids. I think we resented it. Yeah. For the first time, I remember, it was because it was optional for us. I didn't do it to show off to anyone, but I hope not. But it was optional to me that if you want to, you can pray with the rabbis. I think I made it every single morning.
We are the generation that will not be told what to do.
But it was meaningful to me. I was shocked by it, that it became sort of...
Of course,
I didn't know what I was wearing. I didn't know I was wearing them correctly.
Yeah.
But the fact that I was choosing to make an effort to, especially in Poland, to pray and to sort of be a bit more Jewish on that trip, and I was choosing to. No one was forcing me into it. It was completely optional.
That's what I'm saying. It's a good thing.
Yeah,
it's a good thing that we're the generation that doesn't like to be told what to do, because that makes our choices so much more powerful. And I think it's very pre-messianic. Because it is, because
I believe you.
Because throughout history there's been a level of intimidation when it comes to religion and or thinking of reward and punishment. These things don't work anymore with people. They don't even compute. We value autonomy, self-autonomy above all else, and wanting to do. So then how
your truth?
Well, not necessarily your truth, but I'm just saying. That's a separate matter. That's about relative truth. I'm just saying that this idea of being told what to do, we value autonomy so highly. But that means that if we choose to do things out, it will be truly out of choice, right? And so if we choose to do a mitzvah and have a relationship with God, or the more you're able to choose something and you choose it freely, the more powerful the relationship is and it becomes. And that's what I think God is trying to do with us. He's trying to, throughout history, we started off as slaves to Pharaoh, and then God says, "I want you to be servants, my servants to the Torah," which paradoxically will give you true freedom, because you're only free when you escape the ego and escape yourself. But as we go through our history, we end up being, at the final stages, slaves to ourselves. Totally self-obsessed, the me generation. And what's going to happen is we're going to realize how being a slave to ourselves and to our ego and to our own wants actually leads us all to be miserable, which is what we're seeing in today's world. People are miserable. We've never had more materialism, material abundance, physical abundance. Yes, people have challenges in their lives, but there's what someone living 100 years ago would give to live today in terms of the things that we have. And yet, we're not happy. We all want more, and we're just not satisfied with our lot, and we're pushed to want more through advertising and social media and jealousy and all that kind of stuff. And what's going to happen is we're going to realize how much it sucks to be focused on your own needs. And then we will freely choose, because out of a desire to want to no longer be a slave to ourselves. We're going to freely choose to nullify the ego and turn towards giving to others and having a relationship with God. And that feels very messianic to me.
Do you think you started to realise that when, say, post-Poland, final year of school, surrounded by people they're not living by these values, and you'll inject them into your own life, and you feel a more meaning in the things that you do and a bit more happiness and the opposite of misery? Did you ever notice those sort of comparisons, or you think maybe only later?
I definitely felt a great sense of purpose, and for me that's always been way more important than... I've never been like a wild guy that needs to like have fun in his teen years, and that has just not been part of the way I've been made up, you know. I don't. It's not something I enjoy, partying or all that kind of stuff. It was never part of my makeup. And it's like, I remember a rabbi saying to me, there were like two guys in my yeshiva with me, and one of them was like, you know, a guy who was like a bit of a wild kid who like was a bit rebellious, and one of them said to that guy, he said, you see, you needed to get all that out of your system. And he turned to me, he said, Ollie, you never had it in your system. And he was right. Yeah, what was the question again? The question was...
I just thought about when you started injecting
meaning
more
and
meaning into
purpose.
your own life.
So it did. I had a bit of I think, a slight misunderstanding about God and reward and punishment and all those kind of things, which I think slightly clouded my relationship with Judaism for a few years, but grown past that.
Was that more of like a fearful?
Yeah, that's the thing. See, it's very important that once you come to a realization about God and Judaism that it's done in a healthy way, because God wants us to have a healthy relationship with Him. And I think that I was fed a bit too much of the fire and brimstone stuff, which actually can be left to other religions and isn't really a Jewish approach, and actually only the Rambam says should only be applied to children. But unfortunately, there's a lot of that going around today. And so I was a little bit, because I'm very much just take people up there, I don't really take things with a pinch of salt when I'm learning from rabbis, and I think you wanted to speak a bit about choosing rabbis, but that was something that I fell into that trap. And actually it ends up making God appear like a monster. Fascistic kind of monster ways, just punishing people left, right and centre. And, we're worried about lightning bolts. Not lightning bolts, but bad things happening. It makes God seem to be like some kind of dictator, basically, whereas actually it's a complete misunderstanding of God. God is, if you read the Torah with the right frame of mind, is exceptionally sensitive, kind, caring and
slow to anger,
forgiving. Yeah, but also desperately craving a relationship with his people, and vulnerable in that sense. Because what are we gonna do? Are we gonna respond to him? He gave us free choice. That leaves him vulnerable, and it's a totally new way of different way of looking at God. And so, yeah, I did fall. I've always felt since coming to Judaism a great sense of meaning and purpose. But in terms of a healthy relationship with Judaism, it's taken a bit of time to get there. But it's a life's work. It's a life's work.
Actually, this links quite nicely to the kind of my next major line of questioning about. I think it comes a lot of people have this issue a lot where they see it as the phrase in yeshiva was all or nothing. Is Judaism an all or nothing religion? And the answer is neither. People have this mentality which is like, if I'm not doing all the things that I see my frum religious neighbour doing, then I must be sinning, and therefore it's so not attainable for me. That's not even worth trying. They really distance themselves from it.
Yeah, well, that needs to be.
But the quicker that's diminished, that mindset, then the easier it is for someone to kind of create their own personal ladder and their own personal stages of building a connection.
That needs to be shot down immediately, the all or nothing thing. Look,
where does it come from? Where do you think it is originated from?
I believe it comes from fear. It's fear of, if I don't do all of it, then I'm going to be punished, and I'm going to get it's seeing the mitzvot as like a rat race, and you've got to pick all up it's like Mario, you sort of move along and you've got to pick up all the little the dollar signs or whatever. I don't know how it goes, but you got to get it all before you want to win the game. It's like a rat race. But look, it took us 49 days to get to Mount Sinai. One of the messages of that is growth should be slow and incremental and take time. And actually, we know from life and other experiences, whether it's building muscle in a gym or trying to fix certain habits, that incremental change is the only sustainable change. It has to be incremental. And by the way, even then, after the 50 years of Mount Sinai, we ended up worshipping a golden calf. We crashed back down. So even then, maybe it took more time. 40 years in the wilderness.
Well, this links a bit to Poland as well, where people can shoot up.
Exactly.
They don't build on that with incremental stages.
Exactly, it has to be incremental.
It's
because,
just a week.
and we're always told this with Yom Kippur as well, that you should do things incrementally. By the way, sometimes if you feel like you can take on, you're just going to have a great burst of inspiration, there's a bit more that you can take on than what you might describe as incremental. Fine, but I think the best approach is that. And there's I think it's in Rav Dessler's, one of his Sefarim, he talks about the point of Bechira, the point of free will. Everyone has their own unique point of free will, and the idea of life is to slowly climb up your point of free will. So when you talk about all or nothing, your relationship with God is totally unique to you. So it's not. So for every no one's doing all or nothing. Everyone has more to do, right? So I don't even understand this language of all or nothing. No one is nothing, and no one is all. So you have a point of free will. So for some people, it's, are they going to put on tefillin today? For other people, it's, are they going to put on tefillin with thought and with care and thinking about, I'm doing this because God wants me to do it. For other people, it's another thing. And so, apply this to other relationships as well. I mean, imagine, thinking about a friend. What am I gonna do for his birthday? Well, it's all or nothing, isn't it? And you've only known him for 2 weeks. Well, chill out. Relationships build slowly over time, and so all or nothing is actually, I think, it's quite
harmful.
Look, everyone knows sometimes a lot could be a little for someone. Sometimes a little could be a lot for other people. So there's no set rules, but I just think the mindset of all or nothing actually, I don't even understand what it means, but I think the mindset comes from what I was describing as like a kind of rat race approach to mitzvah, which really isn't, I don't think it's right.
It's funny, the reason I grinned when you mentioned Rabbi Dessler, because I was thinking about that exact same phrase on the way here today. Because I heard it put very nicely by Rabbi this week, where he phrased it as, you'll never punish for something that is above you. The fact that you're not, spending every single living minute of your day learning Torah and trying to be the most intense and best you possible, that's not in your realm. That's above you. You're not getting punished for that.
I don't even like the word punish because.
But likewise, you don't get rewarded for something that's below you. I know the words punish and reward might have connotations, but you don't. The fact that I didn't beat up an old lady when I walked past her on the way here today is not. I don't get rewarded for that because that's so below me.
What I would say, I personally think a much better, much more healthy way of looking at it. It's not talking about reward and punishment. It's saying you don't upset God.
Okay.
Because it's like
you don't harm the relationship by failing to do something that's above you.
No, but I'd say upset God or make God happy.
You don't necessarily boost the relationship.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is,
okay.
But I genuinely think thinking about it on God's terms, thinking about the other is the healthiest way to think about it. So, I just think we're past reward and punishment now. In terms, it doesn't motivate us anymore because it's selfish. Reward and punishment. How's this going to affect me? And we don't like that. I'm saying we're in the me generation, and everyone's slowly realizing that it sucks to be obsessed with me, right? And even Pirkei Avot says, don't do it for the reward. Serve your master, not for the reward. So what does that mean? It means serve it for him, because he wants it. Hashem wants it. And it's like, look, it's like so to follow on with this example that you gave, it's like, let's say I see a friend every week. I go, I always make sure after work, I'll go see him for 20 minutes. And then I say, can we make it every 2 weeks? He's going to be a bit upset, because it's like, or can we make it once a month? So that level of relationship where I was putting in the effort and now I'm dramatically reducing it, right? That's my point of free will. That's where the relationship's at, right? So, or as you want to call it, the point of free will. So it's not that the friend's going to punish me. He's just going to be upset, and he might try and do more maneuvers, right, to try and encourage me to do it more regularly again, right?
You left your hoodie behind.
Yeah, exactly, or that kind of thing. But it's never... So punishment, again, just makes God sound so... like a monster. It's only because he wishes for us to be close to him that he does anything, you know? So I think that's a much more beautiful way of looking at it. I mean, even the word fear, I think, did we discuss this? I think we discussed it previous week.
We discussed
it. We don't have to go back to it. Yeah.
Just having in mind that Rav Dessler. So when I heard about the rabbi he gave, and he phrased it very kindly to me this week, he said the one thing you can choose, because all those things are your circumstances, your external environment, and the way the house you're brought up in, your skills you have, your brain. The thing that you can control, you should choose, is one's chevra, one's community. And that can take many forms, right? That can take friends, that can take rabbis, or leaders, or role models, or just the people that the things that we let in, the books that we read and the people that we follow and listen to. So I'm curious also, just going back also to very personal, this age of 16, 17, 18, post-Poland, sort of developing your own sort of free will, maybe say before Israel, was there anyone you were turning to? Anyone you felt like, if questions popped up after Poland, you felt you could go to them and speak about these ideas, or did you keep them all sort of bottled in?
No, I did. There were a few rabbis that I found. I mean, I was privileged to be able to run the Jewish assembly at my school. So, you had about 300 people coming in every week, and a third of them weren't even Jewish. And I was able to invite in these different Jewish educators and speakers and rabbis and rebbitzins and all that kind of stuff. And it was amazing. And I developed a relationship with a couple of key rabbis. And yeah, I would say that's important. I'd say it's actually probably more important in my post-yeshiva years, having that kind of relationship with a few people. I think there's a real balance, because I think there was also sometimes things were pushed to me that you've got to put loads of fences up and not interact with people who aren't. There is some of that thing, a real hesitance to not engage as much with people or socialize with people as much that aren't quote-unquote religious, which I really reject. I don't think it works. I think also, again, we're in the old self-autonomy generation that just doesn't want to feel so restricted, and I think it suppresses our sense of self. And also, I go back to this because I think they are shining examples of this. Look at Chabad. They go into Hawaii, they go to Thailand, and they take their family there. And do they compromise on their values or who they are? Certainly not. I think, and I learned this from going to a non-Jewish school, that look, I'm not saying you don't need I'm not saying you don't need mentors and friends who share your values and that can give you a sense of human beings are social creatures that's very important. But that doesn't mean you stop there. That doesn't mean they're the only people you interact with. We're meant to. First of all, when it comes to Jewish people, we are all one. And if one of our brothers or sisters is hurting, that affects the whole klal. And, can you even, I think some of the things that we learn about, let's say in Talmudic writings, which ask us to be careful of mixing with people who are, let's say, heretics, that was at a time where you had open miracles, or we're living in the land of Israel where the stakes were much higher, or we knew a lot more, and therefore it was much more willful disobedience to act like that. Whereas today, people who aren't keeping things, can they even be slightly accountable? And by the way, there's a lot of people in the religious world who I think are badly misunderstanding Judaism. It's a Judaism governed by, it's a sort of fire and brimstone Judaism governed by fear. It's very black and white, quite literally. And so I reject wholeheartely this idea that we should put up fences and barriers in terms of who we interact with, even with non-Jews. God cares about all of humanity. And I've actually rekindled some of my friendships with non-Jewish people who I was at school with, because it shouldn't affect who you interact with. If you're clear on who you are and what you're about and what's important, and you've chosen it, it's not going to go anywhere.
It's also in those stages when you're a bit uncertain of who you are.
That's when it gets harder.
I'm thinking to myself, when I was about, say, 17, and I found a stronger, more personal Jewish identity, I felt quite shy about it. I didn't really, even though I had a lot of people in my life who were religious and would be good people to go to with questions, who would give me good answers, I felt sort of, maybe it's just my own personal anxiety or shyness, I didn't know where to turn to. And so I kept a lot of it quite internal. I used to people I wanted to ask, but I felt too scared to sort of let them know that I was thinking about these things. I would just imagine what they would say and try and like have conversations in my head to run through their certain ideas, which is not that healthy. And as one...
Sorry, what's not healthy?
I think just to keep it to not speak things out and to keep sort of...
yes.
And to keep quiet. I think it's because I felt this belief in God, the way it was perceived, and I perceived it, and the way I thought people around me saw it, was quite a... there were two sides of it. There was a very religious side, who I just assumed, I never asked them, assumed that they were solid. I assumed that they'd either worked these things out, or it was just obvious to them that there was Hashem in the world, and Torah made sense, and that wasn't a question for them. On the other hand, I thought people who were non-Jewish or very scientifically minded, or very, like I said, Western approach, their very notion of a deity or anything bigger than what we see with our own two eyes was laughable. So I couldn't turn, that was most of my peers, so I couldn't turn to them and say to them, I believe there's God, because I thought I'd just be laughed out. And I thought I couldn't go to these religious lots, because if I were to tell them, I've got doubts or I've got questions, that would also be sort of a how could you? So this is all I've learned, thank God, later on that these were complete misnomers and poor presumptions, but I didn't have the braveness, the bravity to find out, really. I think I had one friend, about 17, who was from a very religious home, and they were talking to me about just sort of their own questions. I remember listening to them thinking, like, I didn't know these people could ask these questions. I didn't know that it was okay for a religious, very religious, black hat type family to, like, at my age, have those questions. Is there a God? Is it meaningful to me? Is it personal to me? And it was mad. I never spoke to this person about it because I was terrified. I couldn't let them know that I also had questions. But the fact that they raised those points of me and then left just opened a whole new avenue to me. Where I was like, these are things. There's a point in school where I remember I went to a classroom and a kid's about 5 years younger than me, so maybe 12 years old, said to me, "You're Jewish, right?" Because I had a kippah on my head. I said, "Yeah." And he went, "All right, does that mean you believe in like miracles and all the stories in the Bible and stuff?" His voice was not as low as I'm doing it now. And I said yes, because I felt like I had to. But the way he phrased it, and the way I said it in response, I felt like he was saying, "You believe in fairies and ghosts and magic." And I was like a little child, and I felt like such an idiot to say yes. And I was so angry with myself. I didn't have the strength to... I didn't care what the 12-year-old thought. But I was so bothered that I didn't feel that convinced of my own answer. I was 17 years old. I was doing a lot of Jewish stuff. And it would only make sense I would do it if I really believed in why I was doing it and I had to do it. And I didn't have an answer for this kid. And it really festered in me.
Yeah.
And I remember at one point, maybe a week or two afterwards, I was like sitting in bed late at night. It must have been about 1, 2 a.m. And I just woke up and I made a 10-minute voice note, which I found recently, where I tried to prove God to myself.
Really?
And I created some massive kafira, basically, blasphemous ideology. I read for recently. I was like, that's crazy. But it sort of eased me up a bit and put me to rest.
What did you say?
It was something, I don't think it was that blasphemous, but it was sort of how, like, it seemed obvious to me there was something more in this world than just what we saw. Something that had to be greater. So let's call that thing God. And then the fact that God has now made me in this Jewish home and said, right, you must worship me. I don't know what that meant, but that meant I must worship him. Now, the avenue he's given me is this Jewish home with these Jewish laws, and only the ones I saw around me. So therefore, what I must be doing is take everything I've learned about, the way I understand Shabbat and kosher and Judaism, and follow those, and that's what God wants me to do. So it never occurred to me, I didn't like to bring the idea of, I should actually develop these ideas or grow more, or that there was an absolute truth or absolute purpose, or the fact of why God would want me to worship him. But like that's the fact, and it can justify, all right, that's why I am who I am. And it's not my role to learn more. But that really put me at ease. And I wonder if I someone to speak to it would help.
Well, that kid, what I would say to him is I'd say, well, I believe in God. I think I'm convinced there's a God, right? So why would a miracle be too hard for God? God could do anything, right? Do you accept that? If there's a God, he could split the sea, couldn't he? He created the world. He could do anything. Yes, fine. And I say, fine, but why are there no miracles now? Well, that's another question, isn't it? Why are there no miracles today? Because
this is us now dealing with the
Yes. Well, I believe
at the time, I didn't even make that jump.
I understand. I'm just saying,
I'm not
for
so-
anyone,
I- I've-
anyone
I've
out there
forgiven the kids.
listening who's concerned about a 12-year-old kid saying something, or an adult, because it's something an adult might say as well.
It was a smart question.
Yeah, I mean, what is it a smart question? I mean, it's a
I don't
common
know. I don't know
question.
why he was asking. He might just
It's a
wanted
common
to
question.
antagonise me or just
He
tease me.
he wants
could
to
have asked
tease
me what
you,
football team I
yeah.
supported and laughed at them.
It's a teasing thing, but look.
But thank God he did it.
Look, is God scoffed on such an easy level? Not as much, because so then the point is like, okay, so if there is a God, if you accept that premise, then why is it so hard for God to do miracles? So he probably didn't accept that there was a God, but then, again, I also think that's fairly that leaves you with big scientific questions, which is what caused the beginning of the universe.
The beginning of the universe is a question itself. I don't think many people, if they in that discussion, are bothered by the miracles because they understand it's about is there a God or not. If there is, they're quite comfortable with what could have happened.
Maybe.
And if there isn't, then and we haven't got, at least by modern standards of proof, that many, if any, examples of proper miracles that can't be explained beyond just general human existence and biology or that.
Right. Yeah. God
So
likes to operate within nature.
Yeah. So I don't.
The key thing is the timing.
like a good joke. It's all about timing.
Yeah. Exactly.
But I don't think it's maybe this question wasn't as sharp as I first thought. But it still it festered me and bothered me. I thought was thank God it happened. To thank God that I think I needed it. But it's I've ranted at different Jewish organisations in this country since to little avail that only because I had a very similar background, if not many, to many of my peers. And because of a few unique scenarios like that, they pushed me into Israel and yeshiva and a more religious maybe upbringing, or I am today, and hopefully what I'll be the rest of my life and on that journey. But I had to, by chance or as an individual, find them. And so many guys were in these institutions where they didn't find them. I think
nothing is by chance.
But I think what I bothered by these organisations was maybe the internal hypocrisy. Where they would be on the outlook, they would say, "This is what we do. We pray every day, and we keep kosher, and we keep Shabbat, and we daven, and we wear tefillin, and all these sort of things." And this is the image they put out. I didn't feel that they believed in the real reason why, and so it made no sense to me why they would do it.
Go on, elaborate a bit.
It's the term that's been coined to me. Someone said to me as social orthodoxy, but it's sort of, which means that you do what you do because people see what you're doing is correct. Like when you have guests round, you will have challah and you will bench afterwards on Shabbat. But if it's just you guys at home, you're quite chill. You'll only eat in a kosher restaurant in Golders Green in London, and yet when you're abroad, you're not so bothered about. You won't eat pig because that's a line, but you're not so bothered about different laws and all these sort of things where it's very socially bound and maybe even peer pressure.
Yeah,
that's my view now of why it comes to be. But at the time, I just saw it as just. If you don't believe in God, you don't believe in mitzvot, you don't mean have a power to you, then why are you limiting your life by so many laws that you don't care for? Well, and vice versa, if you do believe in them, then why aren't you doing them? Why are we only going halfway? If we really believe this is the way, why do we only do the mitzvot that our grandparents did, and some mitzvot we're not trying at all?
Okay, so this needs to be broken down a little bit. So,
it's my teenage angst all coming out now.
It's not typical teenage angst. You should know that. Teenage angst is usually other things. So,
right, good point. Well, that is another thing about itself, by the way. No.
Yeah. You probably should have seen a shrink. No, I'm kidding.
I remember though. The thing about like teenage angst. I remember on a Monday morning in the sixth form common room, so age 17, 18. Where the guys would come back with their tales of the conquest on the weekend and what they got up to. Mm-hmm. And I didn't really go to house parties, and I didn't really know the guys who had them. I'd been to a couple and never really liked them. But I asked them, what do you do? What is the appeal? I'd ask them quite direct questions. And all their answers seemed predicated on the fact that you have to drink and drink and drink to get to a level of drunk so that you can enjoy whatever they're trying to enjoy. Mm-hmm. And that was the hypocrisy. And so I was like, well, if it's that fun, You don't need to drink to get drunk.
I don't know about that. I think about
It can
Purim.
enhance.
Purim's
Yeah.
fun though, isn't it?
All right, I'm a football fan. I can enjoy a game of football. I can enjoy a game of football more with a beer and some friends enjoying it together.
Look, drinking does release inhibitions, and teenagers have a lot of inhibitions. So
If I could only enjoy football whilst drunk, I wouldn't watch football. So that's my point.
yeah, I get that, but there is something. Look, whatever. I mean, this is a whole separate discussion about drinking, but I think part of the problem is doing it too regularly and all that kind of stuff. But whatever. I mean, there's worse things. But
I'm not against drinking. I was confused why they were doing it, just to become someone they weren't, which was something they clearly didn't want.
So look, in terms of this social orthodoxy thing, this was one of the reasons why, by the way, that God says He exiled us, because we were loving it up, living it up in the land of Israel and doing all the things, but we took God out of the equation. We were just enjoying. I believe this was one of the reasons. We were just enjoying all the mitzvot and the lifestyle, but actually, where was God in all of it? And so you can certainly say that on the one hand. On the other hand, there is something inherently good about people doing mitzvot, regardless of their reason, because it does have a spiritual impact. Also, it means that their continuity will potentially mean that their kids will do it, and they're more likely. The very fact that we're doing mitzvot for any reason at all, given what the Jewish people have been through, given where we're at in history, is a miracle, and it's amazing. I think it should be absolutely applauded and incredible, absolutely incredible. We haven't heard from God for 3,334 years now.
Not so directly.
Not so directly, exactly. Not so directly, and yet the fact that we're still doing this, given everything that we've been through, is absolutely incredible. Also, I would say that I think people's reasons for doing mitzvot, even are complex, and it comes back to all this cognitive dissonance stuff. I'm sure there's a part of them which is doing it for spiritual reasons, even if they don't realise it. And I think there is deep value in people doing mitzvot, even if it is mindless or for cultural reasons. It's incredible. Just calling yourself a Jew, given everything that we've been through, is an incredible accomplishment. And I'm sure any mitzvah done by a Jew today reduces God to tears. I'm sure it does. All the more so people who aren't raised with it, and it's not, let's say, as meaningful to them. But I would just say that yes, ideally, absolutely, mindless Judaism, where you're doing it because it's culturally nice or it's something that enhances your life, is actually missing the fundamental point, which is that we do it because this is God's will, and this is God telling us this. The Torah is God saying, "This is who I am, and I'm giving myself to you, and therefore I want you. I want you to. I'm a jealous God. I want you to be one with me, and the way you do that is by following my will." And so being conscious of that, but that's a deep level. That's the ideal level to be at, to be putting on tefillin or lighting the Shabbat candles, because this is what God wants of me. Do I understand it? I try to make sense of it, but I do it because that's what He wants of me. I think that's definitely the place it's meant to be at, and actually it's the most fulfilling level. Cultural Judaism is just a bit. I find, it's very limited, and it's also not sustainable, because if it's just cultural, well, you take it or leave it.
No, I know what you mean. I know exactly what you mean. But it's there are a lot of topics to this that we've sort of opened up here, and Jewish culture today and how it sort of shapes us. Also, and you can tell with the people who are very much in the bubble, shall we say, and those who are outside, and our relationships towards it. And these are all important in terms of the influences that we have allowed ourselves. And I think as long as we're in control of them, I think that's a lot. You spoke about non-Jewish or less Jewish friends, and I'm nowhere am I against it. But you have to be in control of what you're letting in, and that's always key. Otherwise, and you can draw lines if
my
if needs
personal
be.
view is two things. The first thing, my personal view is, if you're confident in who you are, it shouldn't bother you. Look, I'm not going to be friendly or become close friends with people who are constantly digging at my way of life and my values and beliefs. Not because I'm insecure about it, because it gets annoying and I feel like a bit disrespected. It's just a bit tiring every few minutes there, But So that's one thing. But I'm not afraid to have any discussion with anyone. And by the way, this thing about not questioning and worried about questioning, is that not what the Seder is all about? What do we get to tell kids to do? Ask questions. Questioning is at the center because we're not insecure about truth, about reality. And but in terms of being friends with people, the other thing I've found also in terms of especially coming back from yeshiva as well, that an important principle that I've always sort of led by is I don't push my beliefs onto anyone. I don't even want to. If people ask me, if family asks me, or friends ask me about certain beliefs, I'm delighted to talk about it with them. But I'm never going to, and I think it's an important thing, I'm never going to impose my views or beliefs on anyone, just as I wouldn't want anyone to do that to me. You know? So as long as you can have basic respect, I think you're good.
Yeah, I think about it. It's like I'm always, and it happens occasionally, but it always shocks me. They ask me Jewish questions, and yet they're scared that they might offend me. To ask questions not about my own Judaism, but about like key points. They said, "I don't know if it doesn't offend you, but do you mind if I ask you about is God real? Is the Torah really real? How do we validate it?"
Yeah,
I'm like, why would that offend me?
Well,
these are amazing questions to have.
Because religions for a long time have practiced doctrine and avoiding, discussions.
But it's that mindset that I think, and I was also guilty of it at times, for sure.
Well, it's a bit like when people say,
where it comes. It's
well, it's a bit like when on Shabbat, if people come to my house and they get their phone out, like, oh, sorry, I hope this doesn't. I'm sorry. Like they'll apologise to me. I'm like, why are you apologising to me? It's not my rules. I didn't come up with these rules. It's nothing to do with me.
Thank God though that we're secure that wouldn't shock us.
Yeah.
But I do respect when people make the effort to sort of hide their phones or wear Kippah in the right places.
But do it for him, not for me.
Even when they do it just for me, I appreciate it. Not because I need it. I just appreciate people respecting other people. But yeah, I don't know why someone think I would get offended. And I think it's that attitude that needs to be changed.
Yeah,
that attitude, the all or nothing attitude, the fear to talk about God and Hashem in this 21st century world. Those attitudes, I don't know where they really come from. Maybe it's worth a deep dive into them. But I just think that they cause so much damage when they create the complete inverse. Because they could have damaged me. And maybe in ways they still did.
Yes, there's a lot of misinformation, misconceptions about Judaism. Judaism is not a religion. It's not about God saving us, being saved. It's about bringing heaven down to earth. There's plenty of misconceptions around reward and punishment. There's plenty of misconceptions around just God and miracles and science and all these things. And what are we going to do other than just try and spread good information?
Please God. And I am with this final sort of idea, which is because I do a lot of teaching with people who are quite young. And I was teaching a year 6 class, so they're age 10. I frequently teach some 8-year-olds. And I often wonder, what do I do if they ask me very deep questions? It happened once in a class last year. I was teaching about some sort of Jewish idea, maybe Pesach. And a kid asked me a great fundamental question about the authenticity of Torah. And it was also, I was so proud of the kids asking the question, but I also thought, if I go into that topic, I'm derailing the entire class. We won't get what we need to get done. It'll be a great chaval. In my split second, I'm thank God I did this. I went to the kid and I was like, that's an amazing question. And I said, everyone hear that question. I praised the kid. The kid felt so great that he asked the question. I said, it's an amazing question, and please God, maybe next week we'll get back to it. I never did. And I think if I tried to at that age, it would never have worked. The kid was about 7 years old. But the pride in the kid's face that they thought this question and that they were praised for it, I like to think that sort of approach
absolutely
can do a world of good.
Absolutely. I don't believe in shutting down any kind of question, and frankly, it's not going to work in this generation because we value above all else self-autonomy. This is how we begin. We're ending how we began, which is we value self-autonomy, and anything that suppresses that, we're suspicious of, and we want to run away from. So that's why everything should be questioned with boldness, with confidence, because we're not afraid of what happens when people dig, because
Maybe
we
they'll
believe
dig
this
for
is
gold.
No, because this is reality.
Thank you for joining us today and listening to JTV Podcasts. You can find more podcasts from JTV, including interviews with Rabbi Manis Friedman, Dennis Prager, Rabbi Dr. Akiva Tatz, and many more. Available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Just search for JTV Podcasts with Ollie Anisfeld. Don't forget to subscribe on the JTV YouTube channel for hundreds of videos on Jewish philosophy, Israel, Jewish wisdom, and much, much more. Please consider supporting us so we can continue to grow. Just visit paypal.me/JTV channel. Thank you for listening and have a wonderful day.